Good afternoon to the Sports Fan Radio viewers, and we're back again, the judge, and we've got Dr. Alan Pearce also on to talk about one of our pet subjects, concussion and CTE. So very good afternoon to you, Dr. Pearce.
Oh, good afternoon, Prof. How are you?
Doing very well, and thanks for joining the program again. The reason we got you back on, Alan, is it's now May, and we've got 6 or 7 subjects or topics we wanted to talk to you about that have been raised, especially in the AFL sphere, and just wanted your comment on them about how they look and what the optics are and what you thought when you saw them at the time. And I might kick off with the first one, where Jeremy Cameron, Geelong player, didn't leave the field after clearly being stunned from hitting his head on the ground after going into a marking contest. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that incident, and then some thoughts on the AFL looking at it and saying, oh, yeah, nothing to see here. It was all right that he didn't come off.
Yes, that was certainly a very obvious issue, wasn't it? And when it happened, I guess, people were a little bit unsure, I guess, because Jeremy Cameron was pushing away the medic, and there was a bit of confusion whether they should have brought him off or what. And the ensuing sort of confusion continued. And one of the things that I said publicly about that was, here's a really good opportunity for an independent doctor to come in and actually get the player off the field and properly assessed, because we knew in due course that the player was going into the concussion protocols with quote unquote delayed concussion, and we can talk about that in a moment. But see a lot of these issues where the player is likely to be concussed, and there's this no, it's okay, it's all right, no problems, and then they enter the concussion protocols the next day. And for me, it's a little bit too convenient, and we've got to crack this down. We've got to stamp this out, because we can't have players continuing to play on with things that are happening in their brain before the symptoms come on, putting their brain at risk.
Alan, 2 things came up to me on that particular incident. Number one is it the player's prerogative to simply tell the doctor to bugger off, I'm okay. And secondly, what actually, given that he stayed on the ground, is there any harm or greater harm by staying on the ground than I thought there was, but other than coming off the ground and being treated immediately?
Yeah, the problem with players' prerogative per se is that when someone is concussed, they're not actually in a fully conscious state to make a decision whether they are or not. And this is one of the issues I have with education programs, where we talk about, we tell junior players, we tell club players, if you're concussed, you've got to come off. Well, most of the time you don't even know that you're concussed. There's sort of form of amnesia. And so what we're trying to do as well is to try and educate other players to say, look, mate, you're concussed, we need you off. So other players who can see that. Going back to, my original point, that an independent doctor can see objectively that, a player is concussed. Being irritated and aggressive are 2 symptoms of the constellation of signs and symptoms that are part of concussion diagnosis. And so there shouldn't be any pushback. And this is one of the reasons why an independent doctor would be good, because you can't argue against an independent doctor, whereas you can kind of argue against your own club doctor, because it's like, me, mate, come on, doc, I'm fine, I'm fine, and they'll pander to that emotional component. Now, the other part to your question is that there is danger with a brain. There is inflammation going on. There are releases of molecules and what we call neurotransmitters that are causing the disruption. And the concern that we have, particularly with junior players and adolescent players, is that if you get a second impact to the brain, it can potentially be catastrophic. And we have seen cases of death from what we call second impact syndrome. And that's, it's a rare, it's a rare event, but last thing that we want is to have a second impact syndrome happening on live television in the AFL.
I suggest that with a second impact is more likely if a player is not 100% compass in relation to their physical ability to their spatial awareness, because we know that AFL's it's built on fine moments, and players like Cameron, I mean, he's just one of those players who seem to be able to foresee things like Pendlebury a little bit quicker than the players. And if your brain is not working at that level, I would have thought you're more likely to have that secondary injury.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, there probably is. We do see a lot of cases of athletes getting several significant impacts, which may or may not end up being a full concussion, but it's still certainly impacting on their ability to process information and be, cognitively aware, and even motor skills are affected as well. So, after a significant impact, the very least a player can do is to come off because of the doctor's, care. And if they are fine, then that's fine. Go back on. But the optics doesn't look good. And my concern is that this is a knock-on effect to club players and junior players who look up to these athletes and go, well, if it's good enough for Jeremy Cameron to carry on, well, isn't good enough for me.
Professor, it sounds to me a negligence action waiting to happen. If Cameron got that second hit, became catastrophically injured, and the evidence came back that, he simply told the doctor, no, mate, it's okay, I'm okay to go. When one of the features of being concussed is you get more aggressive or whatever. I mean, that's just straight out negligence action. The AFL has been negligent in that situation.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if you both heard the news about 2 days ago where the AFL are now indemnifying all their officials.
No,
haven't heard that, Alan.
All right, I'll send you the link. It was announced by Eddie Maguire on his show.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Another thing I wanted to talk about, especially like with Jeremy Cameron, is reticence of AFL clubs to describe a concussed player as being injured. I was looking at the ins and outs of a team the other day, and I think I broached this with you by phone, Alan, that a player was set, and I knew he had an ankle injury, and it had in brackets Smith injured. Then it had Jones concussion. I'm just wondering, he was injured. Why not just put he's injured? Because let's face it, concussion is a traumatic brain injury.
Look, absolutely, and I probably would further to our conversation, maybe be more specific with all injuries. So, rather than just sort of covering it over with injured or something generic, we need to describe what the injury is, because at least then people will understand. If it's a hamstring injury, okay, it's going to be 4 weeks. If it's a concussion injury, then it should be 28 days. But let's let's just go with the current protocol of 12 days. So there is some understanding from people who know that, okay, we shouldn't expect them to come back the following week. And I think that the injury descriptions need to be far more thorough and also more transparent. And one of the things that hasn't happened in the last couple of years has been the publication of the injury report from the AFL and the AFL Women's. And so we don't really know what the rate of concussion injury is right now, because it hasn't been formally released since 2022.
That's an interesting point. I wasn't aware of that either.
Yeah. It makes it difficult to do, research. And one of the papers that I published in 2021, which was just on the time that they introduced the 12 days, we had good data on when a player was concussed, when they returned to play, because then we could actually see how many days they were actually having off. And one of the things that we found was that the players were actually getting better between 2017 and 2019. They were actually getting longer time periods out. The doctors were actually getting really good. And then in 2020, they brought in, and I don't know if you remember, but they brought in a rule to say that if you needed to have 5 days between diagnosis and return to play, and that plummeted the the time between concussion and return to play back to 11.5 days. And so that's why they brought in the 12-day rule. And so, yeah, but since then, we haven't really had any clear data, and we have to try and work it out via afl.com.au injury report and hope that that's accurate.
But that sounds like the AFL is actively opposing where the science is going, because the science has been, and I've got to say, from a year ago, Alan, your voice is becoming, I think, more respected by the mainstream. You had a bit of trouble getting through the noise, but now
yes,
it's becoming, we see it all the time, because you're saying sense and you're saying science. It sounds like the AFL is just resisting that sense and that science still.
Yeah, look, it seems to be that they're taking a leaf out of the NRL's book, because we have no data at all on NRL injuries ever. And even colleagues of mine who are Queensland, New South Wales, excuse me, can't get any data. So we don't even know what the rates of injury are in rugby league, in the National Rugby League. So it's easy to have plausible deniability if you don't have any data out there for people to look at.
I'd say it's worse. I'd say they're taking a leaf out of Big Tobacco's book. Big Tobacco were notorious. They're just hiding the facts and saying, look over there, there's something else, or really disguising the facts, or in fact just embellishing them. It's extraordinary. And the AFL said it in the past. Yeah,
look at any major industry, really, isn't it? And you can see that the protection of the brand or protection of the injury is a much higher priority than the actual individual protection of the individual.
Yeah, agreed.
Perhaps the third point I wanted to touch on, Alan, was the news services coming out after Tony Liberatore was cleared to resume playing. They described that as great news. He'd had 2 concussions within 3 weeks and a number of concussions in the last 12 to 18 months. I query whether it's great news.
Oh, look, it's something that I've been, I guess, battling the media. And I do talk a lot of journalists I try and stress that we need to be not prioritizing this rapid return to play. We don't need to be putting pressure on athletes through, fantastic news that insert player here will be back on the weekend after their concussion protocols using Libba's example is the fact that he was ready to go back as great news, and then he gets a second concussion, and now look, he's potentially on the indefinite list, and there was talk about him coming back, and then the coach is like, well, maybe not, and everyone's confused. And if we were just allowing players to return and recover at their own rate, rather than this pressure to return, because we don't see that with muscle injuries or knee injuries or ankle injuries. We know that if someone, as I said, with hamstrings, they're out for 4 weeks, and there's no great news they're going to be back 2 weeks early, and there seems to be this we still have to change the culture around trying to get people or presume that getting back quickly is a good thing after a concussion.
Alan, it raised a really interesting point about the variability of how people react to a concussion. Because yes, a hamstring is pretty generic. They're 4 weeks if it's a slight tear, or if it's off the bone, 6 weeks, whatever. But I would have thought there was absolutely no consistency between the rate at which people recover from a concussion. Is that the case?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And individuality is the only common thing that we see in concussion research. And just like no 2 people present with the same symptoms, exact same symptoms, we don't necessarily see 2 people return exactly at the same rate. And look, there are a bunch of different things that may influence that. It could be their prior history, it could be genetics, it could be their sex, it could be their age. We just don't know, and this is the reason why I try to push for objective markers, because we know that symptom resolution doesn't equate to full brain recovery. We know symptoms are much quicker than underlying processes, in the brain. So all the physiology and the biology is still recovering and still returning to baseline. And so when a player says, "Oh, look, I no longer have any symptoms," for me, that's not enough for them to be going back to play, and that's why we shouldn't be publicly, that someone is ready to go back to play as quickly as possible, because they may themselves feel pressured to suppress any, I'm not feeling quite right, but geez, everyone's expecting me to play this weekend. I better do it. I'm paid well. I have to do this. This is my job. And so, yeah, it becomes very complex. And if we could just take the pressure off, that would be great.
I don't know if you saw I'm sure you did, the Tom Liberatore incident. Alan, it was, I thought it was frightening.
Where he fell, like
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Just the whole surroundings. He just was in another world.
Oh, yeah. It was, yeah, when he sort of just dropped, and it was certainly not a trip. It was not an ankle. It was, he just sort of shut down. And, it was very similar to, I'm trying to think of his name now, the NFL player, the previous season. Can't quite think of his name off the top of my head, but he was concussed and he took a few steps and then he just collapsed.
Yep.
And they originally said, "Oh, look, he had back problems, so he's back." And the NFL don't have a mandatory period out, so they cleared him for the following week, and he copped another one, and he had a what they call a tonic seizure on the field, and it just blew up into international headlines. And this is the thing. We can't just keep dismissing it or putting some, downplaying it, or at press conferences, it's like, look, we're still unsure what's happening. We need to make sure before we make any public announcement here, rather than going, "Oh no, it was fine. He just fell over." This downplaying of a traumatic brain injury is not what we need in elite sport.
Well, I think the proof is the reaction of an opposition player, Alan, when you see the opposition player calling to the medical staff to come out because he's observed what's happened. He was right there. He's immediately on alert, thinking, "Well, that's not usual that something like that happens."
That's right. He was right next to him, so he would have known if it was a trip or whatever. But obviously, when you just see someone collapse like that, it could be anything though. It could have been a heart, it could have been a heart attack, and we've seen evidence of players having cardiac problems. So, if it was a cardiac issue, let's just play a hypothetical here. Yeah, we wouldn't have been downplaying it as he just tripped, or his ankle. It would have been clear. Oh, he had a cardiac issue. We're getting further medical advice here. But because it's concussion, we still seem to be downplay it, and this is where I just get so frustrated.
Downplaying and hiding are good segues to the next point, Alan. AFL players admitting they have tried to hide being concussed, so they don't lose their place in the side.
Yes, the culture still needs to be changed, and this is where education can go so far. And one of the issues that I have with education, and I do obviously do education, but what I want to try and impart to people is that the education is there to change the culture. It's education there to create improved awareness is one thing, but if you don't have a social and cultural change to the issue, what you do is that you arm these players with how to hide it, how to get around the system. And this is what we're seeing with, I guess, more players being able to suppress or hide their symptoms or not report their symptoms, or not feeling, right. Because they are fearing not playing the following week. And some of the say the lower list players, if I could use that term, you know, who rely on bonuses to their salary, payment to their base salary. You know, that's all part of the culture that we've got to change here for professional sport. There's enough money to be able to play players to not feel that they have to hide their symptoms in order to continue to play. But also understanding players themselves may not understand it at 21, 22 years of age that this is a brain injury. And if you start to have repetitive brain injuries, at the very least, you'll be retiring anyway, in tears in front of your teammates prematurely, or at worst, you'll be getting cognitive impairments and potentially brain disease later in life. So this is something that we've got to change that culture around. And one of the things that, again, going back to what I saw with Eddie Maguire with an announcement the previous week where he was talking about the AFL's 7-point plan was, you know, sort of clearly stated that there wasn't going to be any litigation action now because the players have admitted that they're hiding their symptoms, so it's not the AFL's fault. So as two people obviously in this area, you know, it'll be a really interesting take on that. And again, we need to change the culture.
Exactly. So my fifth point is the point that the head is sacrosanct,
yep,
except when it's not. And I sent you some clips of the Jesse Hogan incident where he punched an opponent in the jaw. He admitted it.
Yep.
The match review officer gave him 1 week, which I thought was fair enough.
Yep.
They went to the tribunal. The tribunal said there was not enough force from Hogan to grade it as low impact. And they weren't satisfied there was anything more than negligible. Well, they didn't say he didn't make contact to the head. In my opinion, if you make contact to the head, it doesn't matter what else is going. If the head's sacrosanct, you're out.
Oh, look, absolutely. Yeah, it needs to be clearly, you know, clear cut, and they have to be consistent in, you know, what they mean in terms of contact to the head is sacrosanct. And probably more so, you know, not so much now, but going back about 10 years, it was quite interesting when coaches and others would talk about, you know, a jaw injury or a injury and say, oh, look, it wasn't a concussion because, you know, he broke his jaw. And you know, it was kind of interesting because I haven't been taught anatomy for about 30 years now, but and I don't think anatomy's changed that much, but, you know, I was taught that the jaw and the cheekbone were part of the head, and you can't separate the two. And we know that in 40% of facial injuries, there is an undiagnosed concussion. Because they look at the face, they look at the injury of the face, but they don't take into account that the brain tissue has moved. And so, you know, you're right. They need to be much more clear cut on any impact to the head, whether it's low, medium, or high. You know, it's doing damage. You know, incremental damage, cumulative damage to the brain, and you know, we can't allow this to happen because you know, we are seeing too many cases here where we're lamenting players not being able to continue playing because they've been found to have brain damage.
Alan, I've got an expression: the world is run by idiots, and so is sport. And I really think it applies to AFL. Can't they see that if they gave a rule, the head is sacrosanct, as Professor says, or strict liability, as the lawyers say? In other words, you can't touch the head. Mothers of children who are looking to get their kids in a sport would say, now that's a sport that's serious, not just mothers, parents, but that's a sport that's serious about health from a very early stage. From the age of 6 when they start playing to 10 to 15 to when they become adults, that game looks after the head. Therefore, it's looking after the most precious part of junior's body. I would have thought it was a perfect marketing tool, particularly when you compare it to, say, rugby league. Paul Gallagher made a different view, but that's inherently a crash bang sport which jangles the brain. Well, AFL is not necessarily a crash bang sport to the head. There will be some, even if the head was sacrosanct, there'd be some risk, but it can be mitigated significantly, whereas other sports can't. Would you agree with me? You may disagree, but I think the AFL would have a perfect marketing opportunity to do what you're suggesting.
Well, they're going to be investing $1 billion in the next 10 years into junior footy. This is, and why are they doing it? Because they are worried about participation. And again, this is a perfect opportunity to illustrate to parents that, this is a sport that is, good for player health and well-being. Where there's an opportunity to express an example or illustrate where they are being serious, so that parents can feel happy that their kids are going into a sport that is not, almost too relaxed about impacts to the head. That they can take a stand here. But I've advocated going one step further, and that we need to be having non-contact versions of Australian football till the age of 14 years of age, because this is what we're seeing with all sports worldwide. It's exposure that is contributing to the risk of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. It's not the concussions per se; it's the repetitive impacts. And that's something that is still a real fight on our hands here.
To take that point, NRL couldn't do that. AFL could. I could actually foresee in my little mind a game of 12-year-olds playing a non-contact version of AFL. I think it's the greatest football game in the world, and it would just increase the skills, both sides of both sidedness of the body, the mark, the long kicking, the accurate kicking. Get those skills absolutely spot on, rather than the tackle and the violence, if you like, being brought into the game. I think it could be an actual positive thing for the game, whereas it wouldn't for other sports. Yeah,
and we still have to keep thinking about what are the benefits for kids, and the further to physical fitness. There are development of motor skills, how to run, agility, change direction, kicking skills, passing skills, whether it's handball, catching skills. There are all these skills that got to be developed, and we do see plenty of examples of premiership players who didn't start the game until they were 16, 17 years of age. Players coming in from overseas, never played contact sport, but to play team sports, again, becoming premiership players. We don't have to have full contact at 7, 8, 9, or 10 years of age, and still get these kids to learn, a fantastic sport and reap all the benefits.
Excellent point, Alan. One more point, one that you don't have on your list, but came up. It occurred last night, and it's good that it came up now, because we were talking about collisions, and what I want to talk about is unnecessary collision. In last night's game, Richmond and Essendon, there was a Richmond player had a shot for goal in the last quarter and missed. An Essendon player ran at him so hard after that, just to make a bit of a point that he'd missed his shot at goal. He hit him hard enough to knock him to the ground, and that was ignored by the umpires, which would appear to be that you can now do something like that, and that's within the rules. Now, I would have thought we're trying to get rid of unnecessary physical contact like that, but it seems to me that that's allowed and within the rules, and it just amazes me.
So after he kicked the ball?
After he kicked the ball and signalled to behind, and you know how sometimes they run up and say something to the opposition trying to get into their head. Well, this time, rather than saying something to him, he hit the player that hard that he knocked him to the ground. And it wasn't a fake knock to the ground. He actually hit him hard enough to knock to the... How many of those should you be having during a game? There's enough necessary contact without unnecessary contact.
Well, just going back to our previous point there with the judge, we're talking about kids watching this on the week, watching their heroes do this and then emulating it themselves, because that's what their heroes do. And the fact that at the AFL that shouldn't be happening anyway. I mean, if you want to have a bit of banter and wind someone up, fine, but unnecessary bumping, which is we have seen as contributed to potential micro damage. But moreover is that we'll see this in junior footy or club footy, with potential, catastrophic consequences. And again, we will see parents concerned that, their child is just being unnecessarily slung tackled or bumped heavily, even though the ball's already gone, simply because of the fact. And this is what was, I remember playing at school and getting a sling tackle after the ball had already been kicked, 40 meters down the field, because that's what was happening at the VFL or AFL level. And it was just, that's the reason why people don't want to play the sport, or they don't want their kids to play that sport. So yeah, let's make sure that sort of dirty play doesn't occur.
All right, Alan, thanks very much for giving us the time. Best you head
my
off
pleasure.
you head off to lunch.
Yeah, looking forward to it. So yeah, it's a beautiful day. So I'm glad to come back on. So always happy to come and have a chin wag.
Thanks very much, Alan. We really appreciate it.
Cheers.
All right, thanks
Good
for having me on.
afternoon.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Now, John, we might finish today. You mentioned Gina Reinhardt to me when we were texting about today's program. Did you want to talk about the art, or was there something else you wanted to raise?
Oh, if that's art, I'm an Eskimo. But anyway, look, it's just an article in the Age yesterday, and in fact, an editorial. The Age doesn't always do editorials, but they feel this is important enough to do an editorial about Gina Reinhardt's sponsorship of all things Olympic, and particularly all things water sports. And I just thought that the article was disgusting. The way they almost parody Gina Reinhardt. They brought up the art and that was just to make her look silly. The whole article is denigrating of her and what she's trying to do for Olympic sports. And God, if it wasn't for her, you wonder how some of the athletes actually get by. And in fact, some of the athletes in the article refer to the fact that were it not for her, they really could not survive properly. And it just annoys me that there's a person who's put in something like $80 million towards Olympic sports and non-Olympic sports. And she just gets this article which says, oh, look, she's doing it for a reason. She's trying to get influence. Well, yes, she is. She's trying to influence Swimming Australia to be professional. And I'd like to see a bit more promotion of Gina Reinhardt and her ilk. The editorial then ganged up as well, piled on, and raised a question about sports funding generally. And as you know, Professor, my idea is not just to bitch, is to suggest. And I've got suggestions about funding of sport. And it fundamentally starts with the proposition the government gets out of it. There's no constitutional head of power for sport. And so government just does it to shore up their support in difficult seats and to make them look good, to make government look good, particularly around the Olympics. And so we have this funding imbroglio every 4 years about how much funding we need for the Olympics, as if the Olympics are all that matters in Australian sport. And you and I are great believers in grassroots sport, and that's where I think the action ought to be, not just at the elite level, where it's pretty much overdone with. If all the work's been done beforehand by the volunteers, etc. So funding, I would look at two things: crowdfunding, to get people like Gina Reinhardt, where you know where the money's going and you know it's going to dedicated people. So just say Traralgon, a place where your heart is, say they need a $2 million stadium, say. Instead of the government looking at it saying, well, is this seat, a seat at risk for us, or do we have to put this out to a committee? No. If the people of Traralgon say, we want a stadium and this is what it's going to cost, and we've got signatures of 1,000 people say, which says it's needed, it's done. It provided that's a certain capita of the percentage of the capita of the town, 5% so, or 2%, whatever it is. If they send a petition to government, it's done. Then the money's handed over to the good people of Traralgon to manage it, and they'll do a better job than the government will, I'll guarantee it. So that's one way in which our taxes can actually be of use. Putting in $1 billion for the Olympic team, well, how's that going to help Traralgon, or whatever? So I'd like a lot more granular attention to how we actually fund sport rather than leaving it to the politicians. Gina Rinehart would say what Kerry Packer said: I've seen what you do with my taxes. You just waste it. So I'm not going to give you any more than I need to. She will say, I know what governments do with money for Olympians, and it's just bloody money wasted. So I'd rather be the grassroots, which she does, all the way up to the upper level. So I think good on Gina Rinehart. I'm not any fan of hers, but you cannot deny that what she's done for sport is fantastic.
Well,
that was a little bitch that I had, mate.
No, that's all right, John. You're entitled to it, and it's good that these things are brought up. It seems to me these days that people like her aren't allowed to say, I don't like that, or I don't want to be part of that, or have the temerity to maybe ask questions about, is that the best way to spend the money I've given you?
Well, one of the things she said was as part of her push to Swimming Australia, I mean, she's clearly getting some power there, but I want, doesn't say it's a guarantee, but Dawn Fraser as the head. Now, you and I might disagree with that, but that's what she thinks. She said, I want board meetings to just have coffee and biscuits and nothing extravagant. And they made a big thing about, she's dictating what they eat and drink at board meetings. Well, no, what she's trying to say is don't waste the money. She says the travel expenses are going to be restricted except for Dawn Fraser. And they're saying, well, she wants to throw money at Dawn Fraser. Well, look at the money that the AFL spends on their commissioners, including the head of the commission, and the sort of money that's wasted there. That's all she's saying, is that be a bit more streamlined in your operations. And you can look at it as being she's trying to control the place, or she's trying to get a bit of rigour. And yes, she did say they ought to look after their sponsors more. What she was saying there is that Woodside was criticised because they said that they didn't give any sponsorship for the Paralympics for 7 years. That was wrong. And she said, why didn't Swimming Australia come out and say, that's wrong? I've in fact sponsored the Paralympics for 7 years. Now, I don't think that's unreasonable for the sponsors to be not so much looked after, but at least not defamed, and the errors aren't corrected.
Okay, John. Well, thanks for bringing it up today. I think it's a really important point, because you can, if you're a sponsor, you are entitled to at least say, hey, listen, I'm a bit worried about how this money's being spent.
Well, crowdfunders are exactly that. I'm a bit older than others to understand what crowdfunding actually means. But what I understand is that as a contributor, you can see that your money is being well spent. And if I want to put in $1,000 to a crowdfund to build the stadium at Traralgon, well, I want to have a bit to say about it. Why do you want it? What's it going to do? Okay, what guarantees do we have that basketball is going to be played there, or I want netball to be played there, and 10 of my mates will put in $1,000 if netball. So it becomes democratic.
Yeah.
And then it's very visible, very transparent. And you'd have to say that, and I go back to the sports rorts, which was not that long ago. The minister then is still in Parliament, which I think's extraordinary, and still high up in the Liberal Party. But that was just, obviously public money being abused for political purposes. You won't get that with crowdfunding. If once people say that or see their money's being put to good use, I think you'll get more of that.
I think so too, John. Thanks for being available today. I thought that was a very good chat with Alan Pearce. And
always is. Hasn't he gone from boiled lollies to chocolates, Professor, in the the last year and a half since, well, probably since, it's probably coincidental, but since we've been talking to him. But geez, he's a very respected person in the general media, so it's great to see.
Yeah. All right, John, until the next time.